Welcome to The Scoop from the Lurie Cancer Center's Adolescent and Young Adult, or AYA, Cancer Program. We bring together AYA cancer survivors and experts to answer important AYA cancer-related questions. We hope you enjoy the conversation today. Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Scoop today. Today, we're talking all about caregiving and cancer. We're going to start with a few introductions. My name is Bryn Fowler, and I'm the Adolescent and Young Adult Program Coordinator at Northwestern Medicine and Lurie Children's Hospital. Jennifer, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, I'm Jennifer. I am a caregiver for my husband who was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma earlier this year.
Thanks for being here. And Jessica?
And I'm Jessica Kim. I was a caregiver for my mom who had pancreatic cancer. And I am a mom of 3, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of IoniCare, which I'm sure we'll talk about today.
Yes. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here. And we hope that people can benefit from this conversation. So Jessica, on that note, can you give us a little bit about your background, why you started IoniCare, what IoniCare is, and what it provides for patients and caregivers?
Yeah, sure. So I had not intended to be where I'm doing today, but just like so many caregivers, I was thrust into that role. So my mom had pancreatic cancer for almost 7.5 years. And when it came back for the third time, she lived in New Jersey, where I'm originally from, and I live in Boston. And I remember going to their house, I was like, okay, we need to take over. And so they moved from New Jersey in with me and with my 3 kids, my husband. And it was the first time, even after having 3 kids, I actually stepped back and quit my job. And I became a full-time caregiver. And wow, that was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And, I was thrust into that role of navigating all of her medical care, performing nursing duties. I was draining her stomach several times a day, feeding her and bathing her, trying to figure out what she should eat, right? So all of that I was not trained to do. Unfortunately, she passed away about 3 years ago now. And in my deep grief, I was super frustrated. I was frustrated that as my eyes opened up to the millions of people that do this, like Jennifer, and the millions of people that are thrust into this, and how significant of a role this is in everyone's care. Like, it's the one constant care that the person has throughout all the specialties that they go through. And yet all the 43.5 million film caregivers are unsupported, unpaid, untrained. And our society and just the way our whole world is structured does not recognize this role and support them in the way that they deserve. And so from that, my background has always been in entrepreneurship. This is my 3rd startup, but it's always been, I did one in parenting and one in food, and it was always direct to consumer. But what that gave me insight into was, I know the technology is there, and I know that we can reach people in the home. So why isn't this being focused on? And so we actually really, dug into, almost a year of just learning. Talking to hundreds of caregivers, social workers, doctors, supporters, like just friends and family, just to really understand that human experience. And out of that came just, I didn't intend to start a business. I was like, I was grieving still. But of course, I now realize that's kind of how my mind works. And I was like, my gosh, this is a very human problem. There's ways that we can actually utilize technology to better support the millions of caregivers in the home. And so we rooted everything in that caregiver and created IoniCare, which, in a nutshell, is a platform that organizes and mobilizes all the different layers of support, from personal social circles to, even like work life. So benefits and programs that are available to you, local resources, educational modules around key pillars like mental health and physical health for the caregiver, though. And then you can also, talk to a caregiving coach. So we're, building that out. And I'll end with what it really means. The IANA of IoniCare stands for I am not alone, because at the core of it, it's a very isolating experience. And, we're still trying to find a cure for so many of the cancers. But in the meantime, let's ensure that no one's alone in it. So, yeah.
That's so powerful, Jessica. And I love that it was just built out of your lived experience, and that makes it such a useful tool for so many people.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's great that there are so many resources wrapped up in IoniCare, because I think what I thought of when I was informed of IoniCare and when I went on the website, like, it's a great resource to have all of the people asking, what can we do? Can we help here? They come on to the platform. And for me, it was like, I'm not great at allowing outside help.
So hard.
It's hard. And especially during this COVID time, it was like, I thank you so much for sending this, but please don't go to the post office on my account. Like, just don't go outside. So it's good to know that there are those options within IoniCare, but also other resources for the caregiver themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, that is the key thing, Jennifer. I think like asking for help. So it's so interesting that that's like the person you bring up, because I am like that too. So I'm not someone that's like, hey, everyone help me. Actually, part of it was I struggled so much on my own and I wouldn't let people help me. So that's actually the core, like where we started. We said, so everyone's thrust into it. Before you know the full medical plan, what do you do first? You first tell your friends, family, like coworkers, neighbors, however big or small. So everyone has, some people have big networks, some people have very few, but there are people in your daily life that you see, right? Mm-hmm. And you just say, I have no idea what's happening, but this is what's happening. And then they say, oh my gosh, Jennifer, let me know what I can do to help. And you're like, I don't even know what I need help with. Like, I don't know what's ahead of me. I don't know what I don't know. So I don't know what to ask for help. And then as life goes on, you're like, wow, so I have to apply, I have to work, I have to do this. You may have pets, you may have kids, you have like all these things. But then it's not in our social contract to text everybody we know and be like, you know what, I'm exhausted. Can someone bring me dinner? And you're just like, I got to figure it out on my own. And then all your friends and family or your social network is like, oh my gosh, Jennifer's going through such a sensitive time. And they feel awkward. They don't want to burden you. So they won't even reach out as much or just show up. So they're like, then help us in an exchange, even though as we talk to so many people, everybody desired to be helped and to help, but something was blocking that. Mm-hmm. So we realized feeling like a burden is the number one reason why help is not exchanged. And so our guiding principle was, can we utilize technology? It was a question. I had no idea it would be possible. Can we utilize technology to lift this burden? Like, what would that look like? But that's our goal. And so what we discovered, and so that was the whole premise of the whole initial app, is like invite people on, and then you can send out blasted requests for like meals, rides, respite care. Your friend can also do it for you, right? Almost like a baby shower type thing. Like, I'll request it from the team for you. And then, all the details go on one screen. The person says, I got this, I can help with it. And all the details go on to both people's calendars with one button. And so it takes all the back and forth of like, hey, do you think you can do it? And like, oh, Tuesday, I thought it was Wednesday. And you're like, forget it, it's fine. Because it forces you to be in that awkward situation over and over again. Can you help with this? And then I think using technology, it takes the awkwardness around, like, I wouldn't say, hey, Bren, can you bring me dinner this Friday? Because then you're like, sure. But wow, that's really awkward. But if you're on the team using technology, you see this stuff. And I know you see this stuff. And there's only one reason why you're on the platform, unlike Facebook, right? Facebook, there are a lot of reasons why you're there. But there's only, so even by Bryn accepting this invite, you are saying, Jess, I'm committing to you. This is the only reason I want to see your request. And then when I put it out there, you can look at it, you can say no, you can say yes. And we want to have that. So it's not an awkward situation. And then when you say yes, it's all done. We don't even have to talk to each other. Because I don't know if you see, Jennifer, but like talking to people, it's hard sometimes, right? It's like, especially when you're asking for help. So yeah, I think, that's what we want to see in our culture change, is just like, how do we lift the burden for ourselves, right, Jen? Like, how do we,
totally.
It's okay to ask for help, but then how do we empower other people to show up in ways that we don't feel like it's so burdensome?
Yeah.
Right.
That's so powerful, because it's such an unfortunate thing to me. That is an awkward question. Because there are so many people who would love to jump in and help. And so I love that that's what IoniCare is doing, is making that question of what can I do to help so much easier for both sides as well.
Yeah.
I also think it's really easy for the caregivers to kind of, when this first all started, somebody told me to try to focus on the people who were helping and who were reaching out instead of focusing on who wasn't.
Yes.
And I think this is a really good way to kind of focus on who's on the app or who's actually in my circle. So you're not thinking all the time, like, why aren't these people reaching out to me? Because it is awkward. Like, you don't know what to offer, or offer to send dinner, but they're like, no, please. And then you send something and it's like, they can't eat that. So it's just, I think this would be a really good tool for people to use.
I love that. I totally agree. And it's like human nature to you can feel very hurt in this, right? Because, and I think it's also redefining who help and supporters are. So like a common thing is people just assume, like, if you are really close in your friendship or you're blood related, you are the one that have to show up. And if you don't, we feel very hurt. And that totally makes sense. But I think, to your point, Jennifer, like, I think what we've discovered is that there are also people who aren't your best friends or blood related, but they just have this gift of showing up for people and they love it. And then friendships can grow from that. And this allows, like, our average team size actually is like 15. We have teams that's as large as 100.
Wow.
And those are not all your best friends. I don't know. Or most people don't have that many best friends. But it's like people can show up in ways that you would never expect them to because of the history of your friendship or relationship. But, you know, it kind of, we have to expand, like, who could those people be, you know? And you're right. It's like, and then some people just don't have that gift, or they feel so awkward and they don't intend to, but like, yeah, focus on the ones who are helping and building new friendships from it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think part of my not utilizing the app as much was by the time I figured out that I needed something, it was like I needed it that minute or in an hour. But on the app, there are suggestions for things that we may need. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. So there are suggestions that you can, that you could do where, so there are immediate needs, but then it's also like, can I really use this support network? Almost like they're part of a team. So we always use the word team, right? And so as a team, there are things, there's immediate, unplanned things that are always going to come with caregiving. And so, but to free you up to respond to those things. So it's not an outsourced thing where you don't have to be a caregiver, nor do you want to outsource that.
Right.
But it's almost like, how do we lift like all that pressure that we feel or all the things that are on our plate? So maybe it's 2 meals a week. Like, you don't have to think about that. Or, you know, doctor appointments are coming up. What if you needed help with a ride or like grocery shopping? Because, you know, you can kind of predict things that you won't have time for. And like when you have a team and knowing for caregiver, which is also hard, but like they are joining your team because they actually want to help. And sometimes we prevent that from helping. And that actually makes them feel sad because they are actually like, you know, you want to help someone, but they don't receive your help. That's actually very hurtful for the supporters view too. And so a lot of it is kind of changing our mindset and seeing this as a team. And not everyone will accept your invite. And actually that's better. So instead of, to your point, like getting hurt by it, you're like, I don't want to force them to, because now I don't feel like I'm burdening them. People who join the team, I know they really want to be on it. So I can freely ask and they can freely say no. And so I can treat them like my team. I think if we can like see it, like I think we've done that in other areas of our lives, but because, you know, like when people get married, we surround them. We give them like all these gifts, right? Like to get your life started. We celebrate with you. Like it's become a big part of our culture that this life change means that the community surrounds you in that way. When you have a baby, when someone passes away, like it's in our culture, but like why don't we do that for caregiving? It is a big life change. And it's actually the moment where it matters. And like we can show up for each other and not wait until the person, if there's some kind of, you know, end. And then we show up, no, this is where it matters. And so I think it is, I keep thinking like, it's a tool and it's technology and beyond that. And, you know, I love what you guys do. And you are kind of supporting in the moment, right? It's like, can we change our culture to do more of what you guys are already doing? Right. And I think like, so, you know, we even work with employers and things like that because a lot of caregivers also have to work because they're often the ones that have to provide for them on top of caregiving. And can we just like start changing the structure of how we support caregivers in ways that we also support other life changes? Yeah. And so that's like the big change that that really drives the core of what we do.
Yeah.
You know?
Amazing.
Yeah, so maybe even thinking outside of these like really practical needs that Ionic Care is supporting caregivers. From your experience as a caregiver, Jessica, and Jennifer too, you know, what are the other struggles or ways that you feel like support is needed as a caregiver?
Yeah. Jen, do you want to go?
So many needs. There are so many things, and I think it's hard to see in the moment kind of everything. For me, I focused so much on my husband. I actually wasn't focusing as much on myself. So I found kind of, you know, when he was doing okay and when his treatment was winding down, that's when I kind of was like, oh, I gotta start caring more about me too. But it seems like, you know, you just go full steam ahead, just caring about him. So I think that piece is a large piece for caregivers to think of. I mean, we know that, you know, you put the oxygen mask on the kid first before you put it on yourself, or you put it on, I said that wrong. You put it on yourself before you put it on the kid, because you have to be okay to take care of somebody else. But it is so easy to completely lose sight of that. So I think that for me was a big piece.
Yeah.
What about you, Jessica?
Yeah, same. And I think, you know, I heard a statistic that I don't know, and it shocked me. And, but it's like 30% of caregivers actually will, this sounds really like, but pass away before the person they're caring for. 30%. Mm. And it speaks to the toll that caregiving can take on the person, and not only the toll, but uncared for toll. Like we don't address it because by nature, if you're a caregiver, like Jennifer, you like to say, like you are even a caregiver because you're caring for somebody. And, and so that was shocking. And I only found that out like after, and, but for me, it was the same similar thing. I got burnt out. And, I think I remember just, I used to exercise, and then I totally put that totally on hold. And then my mom, like I would have to carry her, right? And then as it progressed, but as I got unhealthier, I had to carry her more. And I pulled my back. And that is really painful. And I couldn't care for her anymore. And so that was a wake up call of like, oh my goodness, this is it. Like even in what we're driven by, we can't even do well if we don't care for ourselves. And so I remember someone telling me, we often say self-care, and that's so hard because it's so broad, and self-care just feels like, who has time for that? So then when I repositioned it and said, pick one thing, just one thing, just one major thing that's an anchor for you, and it's different for everybody, and fight for that one thing. And then mentally and physically you feel better. And so for me, it was like once or twice a week, I would just get out of the house and go to, like a gym or whatever, where there's group fitness. So I didn't have to think about anything. And so it was more mental health actually, more so, but then I got stronger through it. And then all the other things I'm like, okay, I don't have time for it, but this one thing I need to do. And then like, whether you have to have your neighbor come over or this is like, you just fought for it, and it didn't work out perfectly every single time. So that was super helpful in like positioning it like that. It felt more doable,
Yeah. Thank you both for sharing those things. I think it's so easy, especially in the hospital setting, where I work and my team works, to just focus on the patient and their needs, which is critical. It's so important, but we're really challenging ourselves to think beyond that and think of a primary caregiver or the team that cares for AYAs and what we can do to bring them in and make sure that we're thinking about their needs as well. So I appreciate hearing that.
Jessica, what are some other resources? Because IoniCare didn't exist when you were going through your caregiving. So what were some resources that you used? So if somebody weren't able to use IoniCare or found that they needed something else or in addition, what are some resources that you used?
I think I found that it was really around finding people, just even if they're not like my ongoing support team, but just whether it's support groups like what AYA does, and a mix of it, and sometimes it's an ebb and flow of what resonated the most. But even as with online support groups, it was just really people oriented, because I found that, in the world that we live in today, everything's one Google away. Not that Google's always perfect, but the facts and information are out there. So of course I used that, and it was a piecemeal of anything. It was usually I'm Googling a specific question, like how do I get 40 grams of protein in this one meal when she's like 5 sips of anything? Like she's not eating a Delmonico steak. Like how do I do this? Or, but there's stuff out there. And so, when I think of resources, for me personally, I was like, if I need a fact or just to see information, there's a lot of stuff right at our fingertips. But what really helped the most was finding people who are walking alongside me, doing it, or they just went through it. Like I remember meeting up for coffee, which sounds so weird because we're in COVID. But so I was meeting up for coffee, and it was just I think it was a coworker that just said, "Oh, someone just went through what you went through," and I was like, "Interesting." And it was a little awkward, but I went, and it was only that one coffee. Like I really didn't talk to her again. But that one coffee lasted for 2 hours, and just hearing how she was processing everything, what she did, even the fact that she struggled with the same things I struggled with, and then it just made me feel like I'm not alone in this. There are other ways of thinking about it. And so it was very human based in terms of what made me put those facts into perspective, and to process the facts. Right. And so you need both, but I think sometimes we focus so much on like the information, and that alone can actually be so overwhelming or not as relevant. And so it's like, can you find a processing partner, even if it's like a one-time meeting, is helpful. So.
Yeah.
How about you? What are your core kind of, resources that you find are most helpful?
I started very much online. Like I was Google mastering. I mean, when they confirmed his diagnosis, I was like, I knew what it was. Like, I'm informed. And then, but you can't learn everything online, as you said. I mean, the human aspect of it is just, you can't like find that online. And some of the answers you get are just like all over the spectrum and all over the board. So, I Googled and I found AYA navigators. And in that search, I found Jennifer Carrera and Kristen Smith. And it was like, oh, look, there are people that exist that help young adults get through this. And so I called both of them, like in a total panic, I'm sure. Like, hi, can I talk to you? Like, what about fertility? And what about, all of these things that were so up in the air? And so the support groups have been so helpful. And they've given me so many resources that I wouldn't have known about or may not have found online. So those have been really good. I think the first couple we went to were actually in person, because it was in February. So that was nice because we got to, really see these people and hug people. But it was also just comforting to be in the same room as somebody who was young and dealing with something so vast, because like, talking to my friends, it's just different. Like, you really don't understand until you go through it. And as somebody who hasn't gone through it, the responses you get like are just different. And that's a hard piece too. So getting some good advice from people who had gone through it, and those have been like the biggest resources for me.
That's really great. I loved kind of how you're talking about the medical side of things too, and how as a caregiver, you're that second set of ears, and the appointments oftentimes are the one Googling things online and just sifting through what this means and what that looks like. I'm curious, Jessica, if you have any other kind of suggestions or ideas about how to support people through some of those, the more medical side of things.
Yeah, the medical side of things, and especially because a lot of caregivers don't come with medical background, right? So it's a lot to take in. And then again, it's that whole role of, 30 minutes after treatment, like, here's a piece of paper, or like, and then it's like, what? I have to do all this care? Like, what? How? What? And then you realize, like, the care that I give as a caregiver in the home could be it could be what makes a difference whether they can get their next treatment or not, right? Because a lot of it is like, are they eating enough? Are they hydrated? So it's overwhelming. I remember a switch of just, don't be afraid to ask can you break that down for me? Because like, it's so natural for them to use all these terms that are so not normal, like English, right?
Right.
And there are words that you recognize, but it's not what it means in that context, right? Or in the medical world. And so to really break down and say, wait, can you break that down for me? What does that mean? And then, so like not being afraid of that. And then, finding whether they provided, or if it was, so my sister, she's a dermatologist, so she at least a little bit more knows of the process. So I would ask her, can you come to every appointment, or can I record it and then send it to you? Because there is a lot of translation that's needed. And a lot of it, you're just like shocked. And so I think the biggest thing that took me a while is to really advocate for yourself, and to not take it like it's, that's the end all be all, or just to hear it and say, okay, I think I understand it, but I don't want to, and everything feels so rushed though, but to not be afraid to say, I'm going to actually slow down and explain this to me and break it down for me. And then oftentimes I would leave and then say, well, wait, what does that mean for the care at home? And so I started going in with questions of, okay, what does that mean for what they need to eat? What does it mean for, any of the daily kind of care? Because that's often not presented in that meeting. It's usually all about the medication, the treatment, because there's enough to handle there. But then it's like, again, combining the two of the clinical, but then also all the stuff, the non-clinical that happens at home, that's just as important in that care. Yeah. So Jennifer, I'm curious, especially, you're caring for your husband, and how many years have you been married from the point that?
So actually we were supposed to get married in May, which wouldn't have happened anyway, but we pushed up the wedding after we found out about his diagnosis. So we got married a few days before he started chemo. So we've been married 7 months now. So we had a COVID wedding pre-COVID.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's been a year. Yeah.
Wow.
Certainly.
Wow. So that's like a whole other episode in itself.
Yep.
Digging into that. There's so much there. So then I guess I'm wow. So I'm really curious. So you're kind of learning your newlyweds, which take a lot of learning in the relationship and boundaries in general. But then now as, wanting to be and being his caregiver, how do you respect boundaries? How do you even see that? How do you approach that?
Yeah.
I think, it's been pretty difficult. He allows me to kind of take the reins and lay things out. And I think especially because COVID hit kind of at a very same time as we were getting into the vast, world of cancer. So I think that I wasn't great about the boundaries. I think that I more so was like, here's what we need to do to keep you safe. And he was kind of like, okay. But he's finished treatment, thank goodness, and he is cancer free. So we're now in a position where now he's like, okay, I'm going to go and do more things, but we're still in this COVID era. So the boundaries are hard. And I found it to be very difficult because I wanted him, I guess it was potentially easier for me because we were on lockdown, so nobody was going out and doing things anyway. But it was hard because you want to keep them as safe as possible and put them in a glass box. But he also should have the opportunity to live his life. And if he wants to go and see a friend where it's safe, he should be able to do that. So we're still navigating it and trying to figure out how to make him feel like he's living his life and he has this life to live and he should be able to live it, but also how to do it safely. Yeah. So I don't know. What about you? Dealing with your mom that's a different kind of relationship than a husband-wife situation.
Right. I know. So it's so interesting. I think that's really interesting here because when I think about boundaries too, I'm like, well, first let's put it all out there. Let's define that. So I think that one of my biggest takeaways is that my boundaries were different than hers. Right. And and oftentimes in these intense situations, and it's all rooted in love, right? In care. Right. But it could be like this because, this is the best care for you. And that's not what I want. Or, or privacy, I'm more open, but then it's no, I don't want, the cultural things, right? So she didn't want her Korean community to know, it's just she was embarrassed. She didn't want, And so we had to it took us a long time and frustration to even talk about what those boundaries are and why. And then for me to say, I have to respect these aspects of her boundaries, even if it's not my definition of it. Right.
Right.
And so, I think we often don't even talk about that kind of stuff. It's even talking about some of these things are hard, right? Because we also don't, sometimes boundaries is about also facing kind of what could happen. And that's hard. And sometimes we don't even want to face that. So, but I think the more that we can talk about it, the more we can actually function better. But you were talking about COVID and just how those boundaries are hard to navigate. And I love, I don't know, I need frameworks in my life because I feel in the midst of chaos, I need to know what I'm biting into or I'll never stick to anything. And so I started thinking about these, and you mentioned them, but I started thinking about these 3 S's of how do we deal with COVID? And so one is safety, obviously, but it's also defining what does safety mean? What are our no-goes? Let's not even try to talk about it. These are no-goes. So we're not going to debate it every time it comes up. Let's just define those things. What are no-goes and what are let's discuss it. And then what's go for it. And to even align that between the two people, I think is super helpful. And so everyone will have their different safety lines depending on where they are in the stage of anything. So, but defining that. And then the second S is, you mentioned this too, is sanity. We need to stay sane. And that is a real thing. So I think with the no-goes and that structure of safety, where can we put moments of sanity, right? And what does that mean for you? So it's his, working with connecting with his friend, I'm very social too. So how do we do that within that but we need to not ignore the fact that we need to stay sane throughout this, especially now we know it's gonna last another year or so, right?
Yeah.
Right. And the third one's a funny word. I don't know if you've heard of it, but my friend introduced me to it. It's sussies.
No.
Do you know what a sussie is?
No, but I like it already.
Sussies are like little gifts or things you do for people that you like, just friends or people that are just for fun. Like, it's just like, there's no reason. Like, I'm going to give you a fluffy pen because it's just fun. And it probably doesn't even work, but it's just fun. Or just like silly things, right?
Yeah.
Because I think in caregiving, rightly so, there's a lot of intensity and seriousness because we're literally fighting for our lives and helping people we love fight for their lives, and a lot of restrictions and things like that. So I think during COVID, we need to think of those sussies in our life of like, we still need, and things within that construct of like safety and sanity, but things that we would never be able to do other than COVID. So, I work, but then it's like, okay, now I'm caring for my dad. And so I was like, I would never be able to have really predictably like weekly lunches with you during the day. But now I'm like remotely, like I'm going to do that. Right. And so that's me our stuffy for the week, or let's do like Thursday Italian night, or just whatever is just like super fun, but you can look forward to it. But it's doable because, it's the same mentality of what you're saying is like, okay, look for people who are helping you versus what you can't. I think during COVID, I went through a whole low period of what we can't do or what we've lost. And it's important to lament and grieve about that for sure. But I think now it's like, okay, how do we go through this, but in a way that we will look back and say, like, we took advantage of this time, with these new restrictions versus focusing on what we can't do. Because then all of a sudden life eventually will go back normal. And you'll be like, gosh, now I have to go back to work. Now with this, we don't have this time. Like, we let that go because we're just sulking the whole time,
Right.
Yeah. I love that. I think that's such a good perspective and way to stay sane overall. I'm curious, Jennifer, if you have any other insights about being a caregiver during COVID when you can't always physically be present, not only you, but other people in your lives that are wanting to help and jump in with your husband.
Yeah. Well, I was going to all of the appointments with him. And then it was like, an off switch that they were like, bye. So they'll call me from the office when he's in there so I can still be a part of the conversation, which was really nice. But it's hard because a lot of our family isn't here. And so they're elsewhere and, like coming in and quarantining for 2 weeks and then seeing us. And I'm still like, no, he can't be near anybody. So it's very challenging to navigate, but also at the same time, we had far less to fight about because he wasn't saying, I'm going here for work, or I'm going to get on a plane tomorrow, or I'm going to a meeting, which I think was probably the best thing that could have happened. But I think in a normal sense, like that's where a lot of the boundaries come into play. And I think, Jessica, I think you're so on. That's something that needs to be discussed. Like that's one of the big things. But with COVID, I think that, it feels like you have less of a team, and because people aren't seeing you and you're not going into the office for them to say, hey, do you want to see the social worker? Do you want to see the nutritionist? So I think, doing as many virtual appointments and groups and finding that online space where you can connect with people, I think that's been really good. But the COVID piece of how do I keep this person safe is like so major, even after treatment, because, some people are wearing masks and taking it seriously and social distancing, and some people aren't. So for me right now, it's the conversation that he and I are having is, if we want to do this, how are we keeping ourselves safe? And how are we relaying that to the people that we want to see? Because we can't assume that they know our situation and our status, and that even if we're outside, we're going to be wearing masks and we need you to be too. So how to upfront be like, hey, we'd love to see you. At this point, we're only comfortable being outside, being 6 feet apart, and for everybody to wear masks. Hope you're okay with that. Totally understand if you want to wait and we can see you, when who knows when, but when we don't have to have these precautions. But it also kind of weeds out the people who aren't in the place to be complying with what our needs are. So it's been tough, you know.
It's a lot of other area where you have to work on boundaries, right?
Lot of boundaries. Yeah.
Well, I feel like we could just keep chatting all day, but this has been so insightful to just gain more perspective on what the caregiver experience is like. Jessica, if someone wants to learn more about IoniCare, can you just give us a little tidbit of how they do that?
Yeah, of course. So you can go on our site, which is ionicare.com. So again, I am not alone care. So it's IANA care.com. And then we're on, Instagram, and our app is free, and it will always be free. It's the base level of support that we just feel like everyone deserves. And so you can find that on the App Store, whether it's Android or iOS.
Awesome. That's really helpful. I so appreciate both of your vulnerability and willingness to share a little bit about your experience. I know it will benefit so many people. So thank you again.
Thanks for having us on.
Thank you so much for joining us today on The Scoop. We hope you enjoyed our conversation and learned something new. If you want to hear more of these in the future, make sure you like our page at Lurie AYA. We hope you have a happy day.